Thanks for having me here. I'm really excited. See some familiar faces in the crowd. It's always a pleasure to reconnect with friends and make new ones. So my name is Scott Sandison. I am there's a few different things that I do here. So I was an Olympian. I'm currently a coach of the under-21 Canadian national team. I'm an IOC athlete career program educator, and as you heard, I'm a director of community engagement for Right to Play. I'm going to talk to you about a number of those things today, but as we're all coaches in the room, I think it's probably just a little bit unsettling for us to be seated for so long, so I'm going to ask us all to maybe just stand up for a second, stretch your legs out, maybe have a little twist, and then I'd like to ask you to join me in playing a game, if that's okay. Is that all right? Yeah? Okay, perfect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to point to you, or I'm going to split the room in half first, right? So right down the pipe, if you're on this side of me, you're on one team. If you're on this side of me, you're on the other. So when I point to you with my right hand, I'm going to just ask you to clap your hands, okay? So point and, yeah, there we go. Let's try that again. Just once, just clap once. Okay, perfect. Good job. Okay, so we're going to try this side, but instead of pointing with my right hand, I'm going to point with my left. And when I point to you with my left hand, you're just going to say, hey, okay? So let's try that. Hey. 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 Okay, perfect. Now let's see if we can get a little back and forth. Hey. Hey. Ah, okay, okay. Right, let's try this side. Okay, we're getting it. All right. Now ready for something a little bit trickier? Okay. So right hand, right? So when I point with my right hand, you're supposed to clap, okay? So it's going to get to the next level, right? Let's try this. Confusing myself. Okay, perfect. So thank you for that. I'm just going to ask you to take your seats and we can jump into this. Hopefully that gets us going a little bit more and we get that little energy out of our system. So I'm going to tell you a lot about me over the course of the next half an hour or so. I'd like to get to know you a little bit. So can I get a show of hands for if you're a non-native English speaker? So if English is not your first language, just a quick show of hands so I know. Okay, perfect, thank you. So that helps me kind of figure out what sort of speed I should be speaking at and making sure that I'm on the right path with all of you. Okay, so how many people are coaching badminton full-time in this room? Okay, a good number. How many of us are working with athletes that are in age categories, so under 15, 17, 18, whatever those different age brackets might be, if you're working in multiple of those? Can I see a show of hands? Okay, lots. So if you're, show of hands if you're working with athletes under the age of 10. Great. And hands if you're working with athletes under the age of, so 10 to 15. 15 to 20, and 20 and above. Well, a lot of hands up the whole time. Okay, perfect. Some busy people out there. Amazing. Hands up if you're working with athletes that are in school and also playing badminton at the same time. Let's say age 15 and above, because I'm sure if you're under 15, you're doing both. But if you're working with athletes 15 and above that are in school and also playing badminton. Okay, perfect. Anyone working with athletes that are employed and playing badminton? Fewer hands, but some. Okay. Anybody? Okay, last one. Show of hands if you think the best way to get maximum performance from your athlete is if they are focused on badminton all the time. Anybody? I can get the best out of my athlete if they're just focused on badminton and nothing else, no other distractions, just badminton, badminton. Okay, perfect. So a couple hands. Right. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. And the first question is, if you can tell me what's happening in this photo. I don't have as nice a car as Kenneth, but I do have one. If you can tell me what's happening, I will give you this car because I don't know what's happening in this photo. This is me on the side. This is, I think, at the World Cup. There's a whole bunch of different things happening, and I've still yet to meet anyone who can tell me what's actually going on in this photo. But anyways, I am a Canadian athlete. I competed for Canada for better part of a decade, closer to 15 years actually, on the national team, Olympics, World Cup, that kind of thing. And I started playing on the junior national team when I was 19. I was enrolled in university. I was studying economics, probably a couple hours from Toronto. And I spent most of my time in transit when I was training. So there was no full-time field hockey training center in the city or university that I was in. So in order for me to train on the national team, I had to move from where I was studying to another city, or I had to commute. So I chose to commute. I was really invested in the university that I was going to and really focused on studying. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to find a way to make this work. And I spent every Friday night traveling back from my university to my home here in Toronto. And I would spend the next couple days training with our team in our training center in Toronto. And then I'd spend Sunday evening traveling back to my university and then going back to class again on Monday. And then Monday through Friday in school, working on my strength and conditioning and other different pieces that I could do on my own. So it was challenging, to say the least. And I wasn't very good at it, if I'm quite honest with you. I struggled with my performance, both academically and on the playing field. But I learned along the way how to be much better at both of those things. So my first year was a disaster. I would not show up to classes at times. I would not tell anyone that I'd be missing for 2 weeks because I was going on a training tour to whichever country. And then I'd come back, try to make up classes or try to get notes from friends, and then didn't do very well. And then as I started to go on, I started to realize, oh, if I'm actually a bit smarter about this, I can talk to my professors ahead of time, let them know that I'm going to be away, I'm going to be missing these classes. And I found that they were really helpful. They understood once I went up to them. Some of them, not all of them, but most of them actually were open to sharing their notes with me personally. And that allowed me to perform much better academically, reduce my stress levels about being away from class. And overall, I actually had a better performance on the field as well because I knew the academic side was taken care of. So, that sort of period of my life was really busy. And I didn't really make the national team at a senior level until I was finished university. And that's quite unusual for my sport. And I'm not sure if it is for yours. But I made the national team at a senior level for the first time at 23. And that was after I had finished my degree. I had decided to move to Vancouver, where most of the national team was based out of. And I spent most of my time balancing work and training. But I was able to make huge strides in probably a year or two in my performance because I treated every single practice like it was an international match. And it's only because I had that experience in university, learning how to learn, learning how to manage multiple priorities, that I was able to do that so effectively when it came down to really trying to make the team on a full-time basis. So I did that for 10 years, had an amazing time, amazing journey, traveling around, playing in different countries. I played in Spain and Holland and Germany, England. It was fantastic. And then in 2010, I decided to stop playing. And and then started to get more involved in coaching. Coached at a few different places in a few different ways. And then that's when I got really tested for the first time. So I think as athletes, we can focus on ourselves as the primary goal. And then when you start coaching, all of a sudden you have to worry about so much more. You know, I think about Wade's photo of that tree in the water, right? All of a sudden you're the only one out there. You've got to have all the answers, and you need to start thinking about all these different other pieces that are important. So the physiology, the training, your athletes, and more today, athletes are, and young people in general, are dealing with issues of anxiety, of multiple competing priorities, and it's becoming more isolating and harder to foster teamwork and team dynamics, at least at a field hockey level. And so I started to learn more and more about what was happening in these different places, and started to ask myself, okay, if I can take what I've learned and share it with some of these athletes, not necessarily from a tactical or technical perspective, but actually from a life perspective, maybe I can help them to understand a little bit more about how they can be successful, not just on the field, but off the field. And I've spent a long time trying to really focus on those pieces, and that's, I guess, the main point for me for coaching now is to create better human beings. That's what I'm coaching. I'm coaching better athletes for better people. And so that's when I came across the IOC Athlete Career Program. That's probably 3 or 4 years ago, and they asked me to be a trainer. So I was on the, or still am, on the International Field Hockey Federation's athlete committee, and we were looking to try to educate our athletes a little bit more about the different ways that they can balance themselves in our sport, what they can do, how they can work on a couple different things. And so the IOC Athlete Career Program, it's created by the IOC, and there's a lot of different people involved in it, and they try to run these different workshops all across the globe. Some of you might have seen them or come across them. I was part of one that was run here in Toronto a couple of years ago, I think, around a Junior Pan Am event, and they're great resources. However, they're not always available, and training times are quite complex, so it can be hard to make these things work. But it's made up of 3 different things. So there's a focus on education, there's a focus on life skills, and there's a focus on employment. I'm going to spend most of my time today talking about the education piece, but equally there are great resources and great tools available in all 3. And so from that, you can see here there's a little triangle around sport, career, and education. And if we think about the number of hours that we spend, or that our athletes spend training, we all have heard that stat about 10,000 hours to be an expert, right? And so 10,000 hours is now sort of the minimum requirement for being elite. But when we're talking about, those Olympic champions, those are far and few between, right? We have an Olympics every 4 years. We have a male champion, a female champion, doubles, right? There's not that many people that end up being really at the top of their game, and of those, how many are able to make a full-time career out of it? So if you think about all the athletes that you've coached throughout your career, how many of them have gone on to be professional badminton players who are able to live off of their badminton earnings, right? I certainly know in field hockey, there's only a handful of them. In badminton, might be a little bit higher, but if we think about the whole pool of athletes that we're working with, there's not too many that make it to the very, very top. And so again, that's why for me it's so important to think about these athletes as people and developing them and giving them more opportunity, not just on the playing field, but off of it as well. So if we think about our sort of lifespan as an athlete or as a individual. We've got our life across that blue line. And youth, we would say, how old typically before you really start focusing in on badminton as like a full-time endeavor if you think you've got the talent or your athlete has the talent to be, an Olympic champion or an Olympian or in that realm? Is it, kind of early teens? Is it before that? Is it a bit after that? It might be different for different countries, might be different for different contexts. But that first red line where the youth is, that's sort of where we start and decide, okay, this is something that I'm going to pursue. And then shortly thereafter, we hit our peak at whatever this age is, elite athlete in field hockey again. It's sort of late 20s. And then we've got this big stretch of the blue line where the majority of our life is before we hit retirement. And if we're not allowing our athletes to think about what's happening after that first circle, after this one, then we're not preparing them very well for the rest of that blue line. And I know for me personally, I had a really hard time adjusting from sport full-time to the next step. And that's not been an uncommon trend amongst other national team athletes that I've talked to across multiple sports. So just keeping this in mind as a theme about creating more opportunities for our athletes. And I think one thing to note is that it doesn't always have to be, while you're competing, you can focus on both. Sometimes it can be before, sometimes it can be after. Everyone's different, right? Every athlete needs different things, as we all know. And so giving them an opportunity to think about what they want, when they want those things, and being involved in that discussion is really important. So this is just a picture of Storm Uru from New Zealand. He was an Olympic rower and world champion. And he went from the Olympics in London to Oxford and did a degree there. And it's a fantastic story about overcoming challenges to learn and to be able to excel in the sporting arena and in the academic arena. But if you look at the top left there where it says smarter athletes equals better athletes, that's kind of what I'm going to talk about a little bit now. And I guess the one thing that I'd like you to really think about as a takeaway from this talk is how sporting performance can benefit from increased education and the different things that our athletes can learn by learning and by having added levels of education, right? So we can pick any one of these and look at a little bit of a story, right? So if we take reduced stress, for instance, well, reduced stress, that happens because we've got a balance all of a sudden in our life. And we understand that, like I was talking about before in my personal experience about having to meet with my fellow or my professors and asking them about sharing notes or giving me ideas about how I can manage this complex balance between school and athletic achievement. They were able to help me in doing that, reduce my stress of managing that piece, that academic piece, which allowed me to perform better on the field. The same thing if we look at prioritization, it's about knowing what's the most important thing. And so for us as coaches, always feels like, badminton piece is the most important. For the athlete, might feel like that too. For the parent, it might feel a different way. But what's the most important thing at the right time? And knowing that you have a full plan that you need to adhere to and that the athlete needs to stick to as well. It's not just good enough to say, okay, only focus on this and ignore everything else, because that's going to create a lot of stress on the athlete. It's going to put a lot of pressure on them. And then if we think about the resilience box and tying that to it, you're not going to be very resilient if you're only focused on one thing and that thing goes badly. Where do you go from there? How do you get that confidence back? How do you be that full picture of resilience, of determination, of that mental fortitude, that strength, right? all those pieces tie in together. And so when I first started coaching, I didn't realize some of these pieces. And I would really push my athletes a lot on making sure that field hockey was first, right? We want to achieve, therefore we need to put this as our biggest priority. And as I started continuing to coach, I started to realize that this is really, really important, but it's not the only thing in these athletes' lives. And if I can find a way for them to prioritize field hockey when it's really critical, if I can find a way to help them to balance what they're doing, then we can achieve really good things. So I started to be a little bit more flexible. And then, of course, athletes would come to me and say, oh, coach, I've got an exam on Tuesday. I'm going to miss practice on Monday so I can study for that. Sound familiar to anybody here? I've got this coming up. I can't do it. And those are realities. There's always going to be competing priorities. But if we can find a way to sit down with the athlete ahead of time and map things out and say, okay, is this when your exam week is going to be? How do we move some of the training pieces around that so that it's not conflicting? Or what do we do together to make sure that you're prioritizing school at a certain time, but also in your downtime off of when we're prioritizing our lead up to World Championships or whatever the case may be, right? It's not an easy balance by any means, but there are opportunities to learn a lot along the way, especially for these athletes to understand that they're the ones who need to be in control. So the decision-making piece, that's big for me. I try to push that back into my athletes as much as possible. It's not my athletic career, it's theirs. I'm their coach for now, but not always. There's many other people along the way that they're going to be involved with. So they're the ones that need to take responsibility for their actions, not just in the academic side of things, not just in the playing side of things, but on all aspects, right? And I'm a partner with them in this journey, and I'm willing to do whatever I can to make their lives easier, but they also need to work with me. And remember that we're trying to achieve a goal that's a team goal. It's not just an individual goal, it's a team goal. So how do we get there? What else are we going to do? So all of these things, I think, add up to lots of different pieces that give us a chance to think about the big picture, right? It's how do we build the base for our athletes so they're going to understand how to balance their life, how to give themselves opportunities for growth, both on and off the field. And this iceberg, which is fitting right now for the weather outside. Anybody seeing snow for the first time this week here in Canada? No? Some of us? Yeah, welcome. It's not like this all the time. I'm sure everyone's told you that, but it's not true. It is like this all the time. I always love watching people who get to see snow for the first time because they get really excited, and then you see that same person look at snow for the second time, or the third time, or the fourth time, and every time it's like, oh no, this again? Like we did this already. Anyways, this iceberg represents the way that our brains work, right? We've got a conscious brain and an unconscious brain, right? So the way that we react to what's happening around us and analyze and plan, that's what we're focused on right this second. That's our conscious brain. Everything else is our unconscious brain. So the emotions, feelings, things that we've learned in the past that aren't necessarily right on the tip of our tongue or in our brain, but that allow us to make decisions based on feel. Any idea what percentage of our brain is working on conscious versus unconscious? Well, conscious is 5%. And that's analyzing, thinking, plan, short-term memory. The rest of it's unconscious. So that's all of these other things that are involved in the way that our brains work and our emotions. And that's what's making most of our life choices, are unconscious. So the more that we can educate our athletes, the more that they build the unconscious pieces in a more holistic way, in a way that's going to benefit them long term, both on the field and off the field. And the better they'll be able to use that 5% to make the active choices that we want them to take, the better choices for them. So these right here, we're just looking at the different ways to kind of help athletes in managing their education. So the first box there is explore education opportunities. So, and this is kind of thinking about outside of the box solutions, right? It's not just they're going to school like any other student would, but this is kind of giving them some other ideas about what they might be able to do. So there's different sports schools in different places. There's distance learning. There's a possibility of a lighter class load, so taking fewer courses but still being really focused on those courses that you're doing. So there's a lot of different options out there, and younger athletes tend not to be aware of those other options because they're surrounded by people that are just like themselves but maybe not as focused on sport, and so they're not aware of what other alternatives might be out there for them. So then they find that education institution that's going to work for them. They're really excited about that. And then it's really important to build relationships. So it's not just show up to your class when you can, how you can. It's about building relationships with the educators, with the other people that are involved, your classmates, et cetera. And then building relationships with the coach as well. Because once the athlete moves into that next level of education, you're going to need to know about what their plans are, what their timing is, and building things together, right? It's not just a sort of plug and play, right? We can't just show up and say, here's your plan, go out and do it, right? Whether that's for tactics, technique, or otherwise, but it's about building that together. And so that planning is really trying to find that alignment between both, that balance. And just like this mythical work-life balance that everyone talks about that no one ever really sees, it's really hard, right? It's hard to find that, but you can work towards it, and you can learn through your actions together in how to really try to get a little bit closer to that. Time management, one of these things that's really exciting about athletes who are in education and high performance at the same time, they're fantastic at efficiency. They're really, really good time management, at time management. And that's something that when you compare them to someone who is a non-athlete, they're light years above. And they're able to manage those two things, or sometimes three things when you're talking about family and other pieces. But that last piece underneath that time management box, no excuses for procrastination, that is really, really important. So when I talked about those athletes that are coming to me saying, oh, I've got an exam or I've got an assignment or whatever else, how much of that could have actually been done before? How much of that did you plan for? How much did you execute on? And how are you left dealing with the pieces that are all falling apart because you weren't very good at managing your time? And then the flexibility piece at the end. So it's flexible for us, it's a bit flexible for them, but going back to no excuses, right? Like that's a real important piece for me and for the athletes that I coach. And we were able to, we were at the Youth Olympics in 2014, and we won the first ever medal for men's field hockey in Canada for at Olympic or World Cup event. So we won the silver medal there, and it was all working with athletes who were in school full-time, who were trying to find this balance, but we spent a lot of time with them on the field, but also off the field, in trying to figure out how we could make things work for them, and understanding what their priorities were, and how they could really get a better perspective on everything that they were doing. So this is just one example here. This is the Athlete Learning Gateway. This is just to give you some ideas of what's out there as alternative options for education. So it's online resource, free. There's a bunch of courses on there in different languages, and you can see here's a couple, business startup from ideas to launch, sport nutrition, eat to compete. There's a real assortment of different things out there that athletes can find and that can work for them in different places. So this is something that I recommend people check out. You can just do a Google search for Athlete Learning Gateway, and this stuff will pop up. And then I've just given myself a few minutes to talk a little bit more about Right to Play and the place that I work and the journey that I had to get there and learning about sport for development. So in 2003, we were qualifying for the Athens Olympics. And we're at the Pan American Games. That's the pathway for field hockey in the Pan Am region. If you win the gold medal, you get a ticket to the Olympics. So everything was I was fully focused on that goal, getting to the Olympics, do this, get there, make it happen. So was the rest of my team. And unfortunately, we lost 1-0 in the final against Argentina. It's a strange rivalry between Canada and Argentina in men's field hockey. It goes back a long time. But it was back and forth the whole game, and we lost, and I couldn't believe it. It was like everything I'd focused on, everything I'd worked towards was now just vanished. So I decided I need to take some time off. I went to a few different places and explored a little bit, and then I ended up in Botswana and South Africa doing HIV/AIDS education through sport. And at the time, Botswana had the highest HIV prevalence in the world. And it was games and activities, all with a learning outcome around HIV and AIDS. And it really opened up my eyes to the power of sport and the possibility of it, not just for teaching the things that we know inherently come with sport, like teamwork or self-esteem, leadership, but teaching about things that you would think serve better in a classroom. But actually, what I found was that sport has this great way to break down barriers, to bring people together, to offer an environment where you can ask questions and also teach things that are not traditionally taught in sport. And so I spent the last 10 years of my life working for Right to Play. And in fact, I was in Rwanda yesterday, so I'm a little bit out of sorts, so you'll have to excuse me. But what we see now is that sport and more broadly play, games, activities, engages the brain in totally different ways. It allows us to be vulnerable without being vulnerable. It allows us to ask questions in a way that we wouldn't otherwise be able to address. And now I'm lucky enough to work with an organization that's working with almost 2 million kids on a daily basis across multiple countries. And it's all focused on this idea that you can use play to engage. That first game that we did, where I was pointing one side to another, super engaging, right? All of a sudden we're all standing, smiling, laughing, we're ready to learn, right? And that's the same thing for you and your coaching, and I would recommend that, like the first two speakers were talking about, just challenge yourself a little bit in terms of how the structure, I guess, that you're bringing to your trainings and what play elements you're allowing to feed into that, and how athletes can be creative and think a little bit more broadly than just the technical aspect of performing this one skill. Give them a chance to show you who they can be, provide them the guidance and the leadership that you have for them, right? You've got all sorts of great, valuable insights and expertise, but if we're just talking at them the whole time, then we're not engaging with them, and then they're not going to be understanding and appreciating that advice that you're giving them. But if you can form a relationship with them, if you can find a way for them to really understand who you are and why you're doing what you're doing, and understand their perspective and why they're doing what they're doing, then you can achieve great things, I'm telling you. So I think I'll wrap it up there. I know that we've got a break coming up now, so I don't want to talk too much longer, but I just want to thank you again for having me here. I really enjoyed spending a little bit of time with all of you this morning. Thank you.